A low growl vibrated through Leo's sneakers, a guttural hum unlike any delivery truck. It wasn't steady. Instead, a series of staccato explosions, each sharper and more aggressive, made his grip tighten on his backpack strap. Peering around the rusted shopping cart return, his breath hitched. A menacing parade of chrome and black leather, motorcycles, stretched across the grocery store lot. Their engines coughed to life, one after another, layering into a chorus of mechanical thunder. The air thickened with acrid exhaust and oil, a scent that usually promised open roads, but now felt like a suffocating shroud. Leo's heart, already a frantic drumbeat, accelerated. The sound wasn't merely loud, it was a visceral assault reverberating deep within his chest, a buzzing in his teeth that made his jaw ache. He longed to cover his ears, to shrink away, but couldn't. His gaze was fixed, body rigid, a fear bordering on paralysis. Each rev was a fresh jolt. These weren't ordinary bikes. They were custom-built behemoths, with pipes gleaming under the afternoon sun. Their riders were equally imposing, clad in the leather vests, emblazoned with fierce winged symbols. Faces, partially obscured by dark sunglasses and thick beards, seemed carved from stone, unyielding. He remembered the frantic whispers from minutes ago. "A white van! Heading north!" The words echoed, mingling with the engine's roar. He'd seen the police cruiser, its lights a silent, flashing agony, and heard the officer's dismissive tone. "We need more information, son. A direction isn't enough." But for Leo, it was everything. Every second felt like an hour, every heartbeat a frantic plea. He squeezed his eyes shut, picturing Lily's innocent smile, fueling a fresh surge of cold dread. He had to act. The pack leader, a man with a long gray beard and a skull-shaped bandana, gave a curt nod. The collective rumble deepened, shifting from chaos to a unified, powerful thrum. They were poised to depart. A choked cry escaped Leo's throat, lost in the din. Adrenaline surged, a desperate, illogical bravery battling overwhelming fear. His legs, leaden moments ago, now trembled with urgent need. He couldn't let them leave. Not yet. Not while Lily. He pushed off from the shopping cart return, clumsy and uncoordinated. His heavy backpack swung wildly, nearly unbalancing him. He stumbled forward, gaze locked on the menacing line of motorcycles, each a potential obstacle, each rider an unapproachable figure. His vision blurred, not from tears, but from the sheer intensity of his emotions. Sunlight glinted off chrome, dark biker shapes, and the ominous surge of power merged into a terrifying tableau. He was just a kid, small and insignificant against such raw, untamed force. But Lily. The thought cut through the fear, sharp and clear. Lily needed him. She was out there, somewhere, and he was the only one who had seen, who knew. The police had been too slow, too detached. These men, they were different. Tough, dangerous even. But there was a primal energy about them, a sense of belonging and fierce loyalty that Leo, in his desperation, latched onto. He broke into a frantic sprint, a clumsy, all-out dash across the hot asphalt. The air was thick with gasoline and something metallic, almost electric. Lungs burning, a stitch in his side. He ignored it all. The only thing that mattered was reaching them, stopping them. The lead biker, hand on the throttle, glanced his way. Leo saw a flash of irritation, a slight narrowing of eyes behind dark glasses. He knew what they'd see. A scrawny kid, a nuisance. But Leo didn't care. He couldn't afford to. He threw himself forward, a desperate, flailing leap, landing squarely in front of the lead motorcycle. His arms shot out, wide and trembling, forming a shaky barrier against their departure. The sudden silence was almost as deafening as the roar. The lead biker, caught off guard, slammed on his brakes. The front tire skidded, spitting pebbles that stung Leo's shins. He stood panting, chest heaving, his face a mask of raw terror. The world spun in the aftermath of his reckless sprint. He squeezed his eyes shut, gathering every ounce of courage, then forced them open, meeting the biker's unyielding stare. "Please," he choked out, voice hoarse and thin, barely audible above the idling engines. "You have to listen." The words were a desperate plea, ripped from his deepest soul. He knew he looked pathetic, probably insane, but he couldn't stop. He wouldn't stop. Lily was counting on him. A desperate plea. Leo's lungs burned, each breath a ragged gasp tearing at his throat. The parking lot, a sprawling expanse of asphalt and exhaust fumes, blurred at the edges of his vision. Panic, a cold, hard knot in his stomach, propelled him forward, his skinny legs pumping with a frantic energy he didn't know he possessed. The roar of engines vibrated through the ground, growing louder, closer. The line of motorcycles, a menacing chrome and leather serpent, began to stir, a collective growl echoing the rising anxiety in Leo's chest. He fixed his gaze on the lead bike, a massive obsidian machine thrumming with barely contained power. The rider, a hulking figure draped in black leather, was a silhouette against the setting sun, a dark king on a metal throne. This was it, his one chance. Lily. The thought ignited a fresh surge of adrenaline, overriding the instinct to flee, to hide, to shrink into the shadows. With a final, desperate burst, Leo flung himself forward. His sneakers skidded on loose gravel, sending a spray of tiny stones scattering. He landed squarely in front of the lead motorcycle, arms outstretched, a human barricade against the impending tide of steel and noise. He was smaller than the front tire, a fragile sapling attempting to halt a redwood. The lead biker, later known to Leo as Bear, reacted with a practiced swiftness that spoke of countless hours on the road. The massive machine bucked, its front wheel skidding to a halt mere inches from Leo's worn sneakers. A cloud of acrid exhaust momentarily enveloped the boy, making his eyes water. The air crackled with a sudden, oppressive silence, broken only by the ticking of cooling engines and the distant hum of city traffic. Bear, helmet still on, glared down at Leo through tinted visor. The biker's posture radiated irritation, a silent demand for an explanation. Behind him, the other motorcycles gradually idled, their riders' faces a mixture of annoyance and curiosity. A low murmur rippled through the gathered gang. Leo's chest heaved. He couldn't speak, couldn't articulate the words that were screaming in his mind. His throat was a raw, constricted mess. Tears welled, hot and stinging, blurring the imposing figure before him. He opened his mouth, but only a choked sob escaped. The sheer audacity of his act, the perilous proximity of the roaring machine, finally registered, and a wave of paralyzing fear washed over him. His legs trembled so violently, he thought he might collapse. But then he pictured Lily's face, her bright, innocent eyes, the way she giggled when he tickled her. He remembered her small hand in his, the simple trust she placed in him. That image, pure and unwavering, cut through the terror. He had to be brave for her. He took a shaky breath, forcing air into his burning lungs. He lifted a trembling hand, pointing wildly towards the highway beyond the parking lot. His voice, when it finally came, was a ragged, desperate shriek that tore through the sudden quiet. "Please, you have to listen," he screamed, tears streaming down his face, carving wet paths through the grime on his cheeks. "My sister. She was She was just taken. A white van, heading north. His voice cracked, dissolving into another sob. He wiped furiously at his eyes with the back of his hand, trying to clear his vision, to make them understand. The police! They wouldn't help. They said there wasn't enough. Bear slowly lifted his visor, revealing a weathered face framed by a thick, dark beard. His eyes, surprisingly keen and intelligent, scanned Leo's frantic expression. The annoyance that had initially contorted his features slowly faded, replaced by something else. A flicker of concern, then a dawning comprehension of the raw, unadulterated terror radiating from the boy. The other bikers, initially grumbling and impatient, quieted completely. The sight of the small boy, openly weeping and pleading, had a sobering effect. The primal energy that Leo had sensed in them, the fierce loyalty he had banked on, now began to stir, not with aggression, but with a different kind of intensity. Leo stumbled forward a step, his voice hoarse, desperate. She's only 6. They just drove off. Please. You have to help me. You're the only ones who will. He gripped the front fender of Bear's bike, his small fingers white-knuckled against the cold metal, as if anchoring himself to the only hope he had left. The fear was still there, a cold knot, but it was now overshadowed by a burning, furious resolve. He wouldn't let them turn away. He couldn't, seeing the panic. The guttural symphony of revving engines, a metallic chorus of chrome and combustion, initially swallowed Leo's frantic cries. An irritable groan rippled through the ranks of the riders of the apocalypse, their sun-baked, wind-chafed faces mirroring their annoyance. They'd been poised to depart, a dozen seasoned men and women astride their gleaming machines, a formidable, leather-clad tide. Now, a scrawny child, barely 10, stood quivering directly in Bear's path, his small frame a ludicrous obstacle to a surge of horsepower. A few younger members, patience worn thin from a long day's ride, escalated their engine roars, a less than subtle nudge for the boy to move. Scar, a particularly burly biker, leaned forward, a snarl twisting his lips. "Clear out, kid, before your pavement," he rumbled, his voice a gravelly rasp. But Bear, astride his custom V-twin, remained motionless, his dark eyes fixed on Leo. He saw beyond the initial exasperation, past the sheer absurdity of the moment. He registered the frantic rhythm of Leo's small chest, a desperate drumbeat against the blare of the bikes. He noted the glistening tears on Leo's flushed cheeks, fresh streaks cutting through the grime. Most striking, however, was the raw, unadulterated terror that leached the color from Leo's face. This wasn't a childish outburst. It was something far deeper, more desperate. The boy's wide, bloodshot eyes darted wildly between the imposing figures, like a cornered animal seeking an escape. His lips trembled, words dissolving into a choked gasp. It was the kind of panic that gripped a drowning man, stripping away all pretense, leaving only primal fear. A shift stirred within Bear, a subtle but significant turn from irritation to something akin to alarm. He'd witnessed fear in dimly lit alleys and dusty bars, but never quite like this. This was a child's terror, utterly isolated and confronting something monstrous. The engines still growled around him, yet their noise began to fade into a dull thrum as Bear's focus sharpened. With a deliberate twist of his wrist, he cut his engine. The sudden silence was jarring, a stark void where cacophony had reigned. It rippled through the group, prompting other riders to follow suit, their machines sputtering into quiet. Now, only the distant city hum, and Leo's ragged breathing filled the air. Bear leaned slightly off his bike, his posture softening from rigid command to something more approachable. His voice, usually a booming directive, was gentle, almost a murmur. "What's wrong, kid?" he asked, his gaze unwavering, a silent promise of attention in his deep-set eyes. He ignored the questioning glances from his crew, his entire focus on the trembling boy. Leo flinched at the sound, but the unexpected softness, the sudden quiet, seemed to pierce through his fog of terror. He clenched his hands, knuckles white against grimy skin. He swallowed hard, a dry, painful gulp. My sister," he stammered, the words tumbling out in a rush, desperate to be heard. "Lily, she's gone." His voice cracked on the last word, a raw, aching sound that resonated through the sudden stillness. He didn't need to elaborate. The stark terror in his eyes, the tremor in his voice spoke volumes. The bikers, hardened as they were, had seen enough of the world to recognize genuine distress when it stared them in the face. Their initial annoyance had completely evaporated, replaced by a ripple of concern that spread through the group like a chilling breeze. Scar, who had threatened to flatten Leo moments before, now sat with a furrowed brow, his eyes fixed on the boy, a flicker of something close to empathy in their depths. Bear watched Leo's face, tracing the path of a tear as it caught the last rays of the setting sun. He waited patiently, not rushing the boy, allowing him to gather his thoughts. He knew that sometimes the most crucial stories were the hardest to tell, and from the look in Leo's eyes, this was one of them. "She was a white van," Leo finally managed, his voice barely a whisper, yet clear enough in the quiet. "Heading north." He pointed a trembling finger vaguely towards the highway exit. "The police, they said they couldn't, without more information." His voice trailed off, the implicit meaning hanging heavy in the air. They wouldn't help. A collective intake of breath swept through the riders. A white van, heading north. No more information. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening thud. This wasn't a lost pet or a stolen bike. This was a child, and every second counted. Bear's expression hardened, but it wasn't anger directed at Leo. It was a cold, simmering fury at the injustice, at the helpless situation, and at the system that had failed this desperate boy. The soft concern in his eyes was replaced by a steely resolve. He looked at Leo, then to his crew, a silent command passing between them. The time for irritation was long past. Now, it was time for action. "Lily is gone." Leo's breath hitched, his small chest heaving with the effort of holding back tears and fear. He pointed a trembling finger north, down the dusty road that disappeared into the hazy afternoon. A white van, old, rusty on the sides, the man. He had a scar over his eye. The words tumbled out, rushed and desperate, as if he feared the very air would swallow them before they reached Bear. Bear knelt, his imposing frame momentarily dwarfing the boy. The heavy leather of his cut creaked as he moved. His voice, usually a rumble that could shake the ground, softened to a low, reassuring tone. "What happened, son? Tell me everything. From the beginning." Leo swallowed hard, his gaze darting between Bear's stern yet kind eyes and the silent, watchful faces of the other riders. The sudden quiet after the roar of engines was unnerving, but Bear's presence was a steady anchor in his swirling terror. "Lily, she was playing by the old oak near the creek," Leo began, his voice barely a whisper at first, then gaining strength as the image solidified in his mind. "We were collecting river stones, the smooth, shiny ones. She found a really pretty blue one, like the sky." A faint, heartbreaking smile touched his lips before dissolving into a fresh wave of panic. Then the van came. It was going slow, real slow. The man, he jumped out. He grabbed her. She screamed, "Bear." She screamed so loud, his small hands clenched into fists, knuckles white. I threw a rock, but it just bounced off the side of the van. He pulled her in, and the door slammed shut. Then he drove away, fast. North. Always north. The last word was a choked sob. Bear's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching beneath his beard. He placed a large, gentle hand on Leo's shoulder. "And the police? You went to the police?" Leo nodded, fresh tears streaming down his grimy cheeks. "I ran all the way to the station. I told them everything. The white van, the scar, Lily's blue dress." He wiped his nose with the back of his hand. They said they couldn't do anything. Not without a license plate number. Not without more information. They said they needed to wait for her parents to report her missing. But Mom and Dad are at work, in the city. They won't be home for hours." His voice cracked. "Every second counts, Bear. I know it does. I watch the news. People disappear. And the police they just told me to wait." The sheer helplessness in his voice was a raw wound. The writers murmured amongst themselves, the low growl of their voices a stark contrast to the earlier silence. Disbelief and anger rippled through the group. Bear's eyes, usually sharp and assessing, blazed with a cold fury. "They told you to wait?" His voice was a dangerous whisper now, devoid of its earlier softness. He looked up at his crew, his gaze sweeping over each hardened face. The message was clear. "This ain't no missing persons case." One of the writers, a burly man named Knuckles, grumbled, his voice rough. "This is a snatch and grab." Another writer, a woman with a braid of silver hair named Raven, stepped forward. "Kids don't just disappear. Not like this." Bear stood, his full height casting a shadow over Leo. He clapped his hands together, a sharp sound that cut through the low murmurs. "All right, listen up." His voice boomed, regaining its usual authority. The riders instantly snapped to attention, their eyes fixed on their leader. "Knuckles, Raven, you're with me. We're heading north. We'll take the main highway first, then split off onto the county roads. Keep your eyes peeled for anything matching that description. A white van, rusty, moving fast or trying to blend in." He turned to a younger rider, a wiry man known as Ghost. "Ghost, you take the southern route. Check all the side roads, the industrial parks. He might double back, try to throw us off." "Spider," Bear continued, addressing a lanky rider with a keen intellect, "get on the comms. Alert the network. Every chapter within a 100-mile radius needs to know about this van. Give them the description, the direction of travel. Tell them to call us directly, not the cops. We'll handle the intel." Spider nodded, already pulling out his satellite phone. "The rest of you," Bear commanded, his gaze sweeping over the remaining riders. "Spread out. Hit every gas station, every diner, every roadside motel. Ask questions. Show them Lily's photo." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn, slightly crumpled photograph. It showed a beaming girl with bright, curious eyes, a gap between her two front teeth, holding a faded plush rabbit. "This is Lily. Show everyone. Someone might have seen something." He handed the photo to a rider, who carefully took it, his expression grim. Bear looked down at Leo, who was still trembling, but watching him with a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "Leo, you stay here. With me." He placed a hand on the boy's head, a gesture of comfort and protection. "You're our eyes and ears. If you remember anything else, anything at all, you tell me. Understand? Leo nodded vehemently, his fear momentarily overshadowed by a surge of purpose. He felt a fragile spark of hope ignite within him. These hardened, intimidating people, who looked like they'd ridden straight out of a nightmare, were going to help. They were going to find Lily. The engines roared to life again, but this time, the sound was different. It wasn't a casual departure. It was a call to arms, a declaration of war against the injustice that had befallen a small, innocent girl. The ground vibrated with the collective power, a promise of swift, relentless pursuit. One by one, the motorcycles peeled away, not in a careless rush, but with a focused, determined speed, fanning out in every direction, a dark, spreading net cast across the land. Bear, with Leo perched precariously on the tank of his bike, was the first to disappear down the northern road, a black silhouette against the fading afternoon sun, a beacon of grim resolve. Every second counts. The word hung in the air, a cold, sharp blade severing the last threads of their casual afternoon. Kidnapping. It wasn't just a missing person. It was a race against a clock, ticking down to an unknown, horrifying destination. The low murmur of the engines that had just moments ago promised the open road now seemed an ominous growl. Faces that had been hardened by years of living on the edge, now creased with a different kind of worry. These men understood the dark corners of the world better than most, and the thought of a child in one of them, alone and terrified, struck a chord that resonated deeply. Bear's fist, still clenched from his earlier dismissal of Leo, slowly uncurled on the scarred tabletop. His eyes, usually a stormy gray, darkened further as he stared at the boy. Leo, small and trembling, was a stark contrast to the hulking figures surrounding him. The boy's sniffles were the only sound breaking the sudden heavy silence. "Lily," Leo whispered, his voice cracking. She likes to draw. She draws me all the time. And flowers. She loves yellow flowers." His words were a desperate attempt to paint a picture of his sister, to make her real, tangible, to these strangers who held her fate, and his, in their hands. He clutched the faded picture of Lily, its edges soft from countless touches, as if it were a talisman against the encroaching darkness. Bear swallowed hard, the rough rasp of his throat audible in the quiet. He'd seen plenty of tough situations, dealt with his share of desperate pleas, but this was different. This was a child, stripped of his innocence, begging for the life of another child. The image of his own niece, a feisty redhead who'd just learned to ride a bike, flashed unbidden into his mind. The thought of her in Lily's shoes sent a jolt of visceral anger through him. He pushed back from the table, the heavy chair scraping against the concrete floor, a sound that made Leo flinch. Bear's gaze swept across his men, each face reflecting a similar dawning realization of the gravity of the situation. Spider, usually quick with a sarcastic quip, was uncharacteristically silent, his fingers tapping a restless rhythm on his phone. Grunt, whose usual expression was a permanent scowl, actually looked pained. "All right, listen up," Bear's voice rumbled, cutting through the thick air. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order, delivered with the weight of absolute authority. "Every damn second counts. This ain't about some turf war or a bad deal gone south. This is a kid, a little girl." He paused, letting the words sink in, letting the full, ugly truth settle. "The cops are dragging their feet, and by the time they get their act together, it could be too late." He pointed a thick finger at Spider. "You got that network buzzing, right? Every pair of eyes, every ear. I want that van description out. Color, make, model, anything Leo remembers. And the guy. Scarface, right, Leo? Leo nodded mutely, his eyes wide, clinging to Bear's every word. Bear turned his attention back to the rest of the crew. Drop everything. Everything. Whatever runs you had planned, whatever errands needed doing, whatever score was waiting, it can wait. This kid needs us. We are finding Lily. The collective nod that followed was almost imperceptible, yet it carried the unspoken promise of unwavering loyalty and grim determination. The air in the garage, once thick with engine fumes and stale beer, now crackled with a new, urgent energy. The bikers, who had been on the verge of dispersing, now stood united, a formidable force turning its considerable might to a single, desperate cause. Bear strode to the oversized map tacked to the wall, his finger tracing a line north. North and south teams are still a go, but I want eyes on every back road, every truck stop, every diner. That van won't just vanish into thin air. He's got to eat, got to sleep, got to refuel. Someone sees something, they call in immediately. He looked at Leo, a flicker of something akin to paternal concern softening his rugged features. You're coming with me, kid. You're our best lead. Every detail, every memory, no matter how small, could be the one that cracks this thing open. Leo, who had braced himself for dismissal, felt a wave of relief so profound it almost buckled his knees. He wasn't alone. These formidable men, initially terrifying, were now his unlikely protectors, his only hope. He clung to the tattered photograph of Lily, a tiny beacon in the overwhelming darkness, and felt a fragile spark of hope ignite within him. The search was on. The network mobilizes. The usual engine chorus, a prelude to the rider's departure, was replaced by a tense, immediate hush. Only the low thrum of idling bikes and Bear's sharp commands cut through the quiet. He stood, a formidable silhouette against the bleeding sunset, in the asphalt lot's heart, his gaze a wide sweep over the assembled men. Leo, still clutching his worn teddy bear, watched with wide, unblinking eyes a tiny fixed point in the dizzying chaos. Listen up. Bear's voice, typically a gravelly rumble, now had a razor's edge. Spider, you and your crew hit Highway 17 north. Every rest stop, every diner, every damn gas station, comb them. Ask questions. Show them the picture. A thick finger jabbed toward Spider, whose phone already glowed with Lily's bright, guileless face. Grunt, you take the back roads, the county lines, farmland, industrial parks, anything off the main arteries. They might try to hide the van in plain sight. Heads nodded, faces grim. The club's typical boisterous energy had dissolved into taut focus. This wasn't a turf war or a routine delivery. This was about a child, and the change in their collective demeanor was palpable. Phones materialized, thumbs flying across keypads, the air filled with rapid-fire calls, a complex weave of street slang and urgent interrogation. Yeah, Grinder here. Listen, I need the word out. White van, older model. Maybe some rust. Heading north, probably. Kidnapped a little girl, Lily. Those pictures coming. I need eyes everywhere, man. Every rat, every snitch, every good Samaritan. Anything. Call me immediately. The speaker, a burly rider, spoke with an intensity Leo hadn't imagined, from a man who, moments before, had seemed poised to swat him away. A flicker of hope ignited, in Leo, a tiny spark in the cold pit of his stomach. These men, with their tattoos and leather, moved with a speed and purpose the police had yet to demonstrate. He watched Bear continue his urgent orchestrations. Whiskey, take the eastern routes, toward the lake. Don't just look for the van. Look for anything out of place. A shifty character. A kid who shouldn't be there. Trust your gut. Urgency crackled in the air. Bikers mounted their machines, the initial reluctant rumblings yielding to powerful roars as engines caught. Bear turned to Leo, his expression softening slightly. You're with me, kid. You're our eyes. You saw him. You saw the van. Leo nodded, his throat tight. The thought of speeding through the night on a motorcycle usually terrified him. But now, fear was eclipsed by fierce determination. He had to help them. He had to find Lily. As the first groups of riders peeled off, their headlights carving paths through the deepening dusk, an organized frenzy took hold. Calls continued, a spiderweb of communications spreading across the city and beyond. One wiry rider, with a long ponytail, practically bellowed into his phone. Jimmy, you hear me? Call your cousins in Kingston, your uncle in Belleville. Tell them to spread the word. This ain't no game. This is real. Bear watched them go, his gaze unwavering. His network was vast, reaching into every corner of the underworld, but also touching legitimate businesses, lonely truck stops, and forgotten rural communities. Everyone owed someone a favor. Everyone knew someone who knew someone. Now, every single one of those threads was being pulled taut, focused on one objective: a white van and a missing girl. He turned back to Leo, who looked small and vulnerable amidst the thrumming power of the remaining motorcycles. All right, Leo, Bear said, his voice surprisingly gentle. We're hitting the main arteries first, then looping back. You stay close, understand? We're going to find her. Leo swallowed hard, the word find echoing in his mind. He gripped the teddy bear tighter, its worn fur a small comfort. He looked up at Bear's stern, weathered face and saw not a menacing figure, but a promise. A promise that, for the first time since Lily had vanished, felt real. The last of the search teams revved their engines, the combined roar a symphony of purpose, then thundered out of the lot, one by one, disappearing into the gathering darkness. A network of steel and resolve unleashed. Leo climbed onto the back of Bear's bike, a silent, trembling passenger in a desperate, urgent hunt. Crucial clues. The Harley's low growl, Bear's custom, replaced the distant echo of sirens, its steady thrum a pulse against Leo's small frame. Parked in a diner lot, the air hung heavy with the ghosts of forgotten coffee and the sharp tang of frying onions. A world away from the sterile quiet of the police station, Bear, a mountain of a man, gently anchored Leo with a hand on his shoulder. Breathe, kid. We'll find her. But I need everything you've got. Every scrap, no matter how small. Leo burrowed his face into Barnaby, his worn teddy bear, the soft plush a familiar comfort. Lily's startled eyes, the terrifying lurch as she was dragged into the van, flashed behind his eyelids. He squeezed Barnaby, willing the terror to recede, desperate to distill the chaos into distinct images. The van. The man. A maelstrom of fear, yet details began to surface, like stones rising from a receding tide. The man, Leo rasped, his voice barely a whisper. He had a hat. Bear's usually narrowed eyes widened fractionally. A hat? What sort, Leo? His tone, surprisingly gentle, softened the grit of his voice. Leo chewed his lip, picturing it. Like a baseball cap, but blue. Dark blue. He nodded, a fragile certainty taking root. Yeah, dark blue. Bear's gaze swept over the riders, who'd formed a loose semicircle, their focus absolute. Spider, propped against a battered pickup, retrieved a small notepad and a stubby pencil. Grunt, a man of few words, simply crossed his burly arms in affirmation. "Blue baseball cap," Bear articulated, his voice resonating. "Dark blue, got it." He returned his attention to Leo, a steady anchor. "Excellent, Leo. Absolutely excellent. Anything else about him?" "A jacket, shoes, whatever you recall." Leo squeezed his eyes shut, replaying the scene. The alley, the bright afternoon sun, the sudden plunge of dread. He saw the stark white van against the grimy brick. Then a new detail, sharp and undeniable, pierced through the haze. "The van!" he blurted, eyes snapping open. "The back door. It was crinkled, like someone hit it." He mimed crumpling paper with a free hand. "Dented. On the bottom. Near the handle." A ripple of low murmurs stirred among the riders. This wasn't just any white van. It was uniquely marked. Bear's rugged stoicism gave way to renewed resolve. He clapped Leo's back, a firm, encouraging touch. "You're doing brilliantly, kid. Truly." "Dented back door. Near the handle. Are you positive?" Leo nodded vehemently, a wave of relief washing over him. Remembering, contributing, it felt like actively helping Lily, even if he couldn't physically rescue her. "Yes, I saw it when they pulled her in." His voice caught, but he pushed past it. "It was like a big wrinkle in the metal." Bear straightened, his gaze sweeping his men. "You heard the boy. Blue baseball cap, dark blue. White van, passenger side back door, dented near the handle. A big wrinkle in the metal." He pointed a thick finger at Spider. "Disseminate that. Immediately. Text, radio, smoke signals if you have to. Every rider needs this intel now." Spider was already scratching furiously, tearing off the sheet to hand to a younger rider with a patchwork vest, whose thumbs flew across his phone screen. "This is pure gold, Leo," Bear declared, his voice imbued with a newfound intensity. "This is the kind of detail that turns the tide. Stick with me. Keep digging. Anything else that surfaces, you tell me. Don't hold back." The diner lot's atmosphere had palpably shifted, from urgent mobilization to hyper-focused pursuit. The riders, moments ago a scattered assembly, now coalesced into a unified, determined force. Their conversations sharpened, movements more precise. The fresh clues were a potent scent on the wind, invigorating their hunt. Leo watched them, a strange blend of fear and admiration swirling inside. These men, with their tattoos and leather, their thundering machines, were taking his sister's abduction personally. They weren't merely following orders. They were driven by something deeper, something he couldn't quite articulate, but felt in the very air around them. And he, Leo, the frightened kid clutching a teddy bear, was at the heart of their mission. He took a deep breath, clutching Barnaby, and forced himself to remember more. For Lily, he had to. The search begins. The collective growl of the riders' machines, momentarily silenced by the gravity of Leo's plea, now erupted with a renewed, purposeful fury. It wasn't the aimless rumble of a leisurely ride. It was a hungry, predatory sound, each engine a promise of retribution. Leather-clad figures, stripped of their swagger and imbued with a grim resolve, swung onto their bikes. Helmets were snapped into place, visors lowered, transforming individual faces into a unified, unyielding front. The air thrummed with the sheer power, waiting to be unleashed. Bear, his gaze sweeping over his crew, offered a single, curt nod. No grand speeches were needed. The urgency in Leo's voice, the raw fear in his eyes, had etched itself onto every rider's consciousness. This wasn't just a favor. It was a crusade, with a final, shared glance that spoke volumes. The first cluster of bikes peeled away from the gas station forecourt. Tires shrieked briefly, then gripped, propelling them into the fading afternoon light. They split, some turning north, others west, their powerful headlights carving bright paths through the encroaching dusk. The roar began to dissipate as they fanned out, disappearing one by one into the urban labyrinth. Each rider carried a mental image: a dark blue baseball cap, a white van, a dent like a jagged scar near the back passenger side door handle. Those details, whispered by a terrified child, were now their compass. Bear watched them go, a complex mix of emotions churning beneath his stoic exterior. Part of him yearned to be out there, leading the charge, but he knew his place was here, anchoring the operation, and perhaps more importantly, anchoring Leo. He turned, his heavy boots crunching on the asphalt, to find Leo still standing by the gas pumps, a small, solitary figure amidst the lingering scent of gasoline and exhaust fumes. The boy's shoulders were hunched, his hands clasped so tightly they were white at the knuckles. He looked utterly drained, the adrenaline that had fueled his desperate plea now receding, leaving him vulnerable and trembling. Bear's voice, though still gravelly, softened considerably. "All right, kid, they're on it. Now you and me, we're going to find us a quieter spot." He gestured towards the worn, red-painted picnic table outside the station's convenience store. "You look like you could use a seat," Leo nodded numbly, following Bear. His eyes darted nervously around as if Lily might suddenly materialize from behind a stack of soda crates, or the white van might roar past, a taunting specter. Bear settled onto the bench, the plastic groaning under his weight, and Leo tentatively perched on the edge opposite him. "Tell me again, Leo," Bear began, his voice low and steady, a reassuring anchor in the boy's turbulent world. "Everything you remember. Don't worry about if it seems important or not, just whatever comes to mind." He leaned forward slightly, his massive frame radiating an unexpected warmth. "Even the smallest thing can make a difference." Leo took a shuddering breath, his gaze fixed on a distant streetlight that had just flickered to life. She was laughing," he began, his voice a fragile whisper. "We were playing tag, and then he just grabbed her from behind." A fresh wave of tears welled in his eyes, but he blinked them back, determined not to falter. He had a hand over her mouth. She tried to scream, but he trailed off, the memory a fresh stab wound. Bear listened patiently, his eyes never leaving Leo's face. He let the silence hang, giving the boy space to compose himself. "The cap," Bear prompted gently, when Leo seemed to lose his way. "You said dark blue. Anything else about it? A logo? A mark?" Leo squeezed his eyes shut, trying to conjure the image. "It was plain. No team, no writing. Just dark blue. And it was a little faded, maybe, like it had been worn a lot." He opened his eyes, a flicker of pride in their depths, that he could recall such a detail. "And the van, the dent, it wasn't small. It was like a big dent pushed in, right by the handle. And it was pretty dirty, the van was. Not like a new one." "Good, Leo. That's real good," Bear praised, a genuine note of encouragement in his tone. He pulled out a small dog-eared notepad and a stubby pencil from his vest pocket, carefully jotting down the details. He wasn't just listening, he was absorbing, processing. "What about the man himself? Anything you saw of his face? Anything at all?" Leo bit his lip, his brow furrowed in concentration. "He was big, taller than my dad, and he had light hair, I think, under the cap, and a beard, maybe?" Not a long one, but scruffy. He shivered. His eyes, they were just cold. Bear nodded, making another note. Did he say anything? To Lily? To you? No, nothing. He just pulled her in. Leo's voice cracked. And then he drove off fast, north. I tried to run after them, but... He gestured helplessly, the memory of the van speeding away, leaving him alone and powerless, clearly overwhelming him again. Bear reached across the table, his massive hand coming to rest, surprisingly gently, on Leo's shoulder. You did good, Leo. Real good. You came for help, and you gave us what we need. You're being incredibly brave right now. Leo looked up at Bear, a flicker of something akin to hope in his tear-filled eyes. He didn't feel brave. He felt small and scared and utterly alone. But Bear's words, heavy with sincerity, offered a fragile comfort. He leaned into the touch, a silent acknowledgement of the unexpected solace he found in the gruff biker's presence. The distant hum of the city, now devoid of the roaring motorcycles, seemed to settle into a rhythm of waiting, a glimmer of hope. The afternoon light, a mellowing presence now, softened into oranges and purples. No longer the bright shield Leo had desperately needed against his despair. Each minute felt like a lead weight, dragging him deeper into a gnawing pit of fear. He'd meticulously recounted every detail to Bear. The faint, stale scent of cigarettes, the van's protesting side door, the small rip in Lily's jeans as she'd been snatched away. Bear had listened, his deep voice a surprisingly gentle balm that belied his imposing stature, asking questions with a quiet intensity. Now, the questions had evaporated, leaving behind a heavy silence broken only by the city's distant hum. Leo sat, a small figure swallowed by the worn leather sofa's bulk, watching the sun sink lower through Bear's grimy office window. Distorted shadows stretched across the floor, mirroring the anxieties coiling in his gut. Lily detested the dark. Even at 12, she needed a nightlight. Where was she now? Was she frightened? Cold? A familiar burn pricked behind his eyes, his throat tightening. He'd vowed to always protect her. He'd failed. Bear, who had been pacing the small room like a restless animal, paused by the window, his gaze fixed on the diminishing light. He sensed the boy's rising panic. The way Leo's hands compulsively twisted his t-shirt hem. The kid was hanging by a thread, and every encroaching shadow seemed to fray it further. Bear knew that suffocating helplessness, the primal fear that clawed at a person when a loved one was in peril. He turned, his gruff features softened by a rare expression of concern. Easy, kid, Bear rumbled, his voice low but steady. Worrying won't make the wheels turn faster. My riders are out there. They're the best. They'll find her. Leo nodded, though the words did little to quell the frantic fluttering in his chest. He pictured Lily, alone and terrified. The image was a searing pain. He longed to act, to do anything, but all he could do was sit, wait, and watch the world dim. The vibrant sunset hues rapidly bled into a bruised twilight, and with them, his fragile hope seemed to dwindle. Each tick of the clock was a hammer blow against his weakening resolve. Just as the last sliver of sun vanished below the horizon, plunging the room into a murky gloom, Bear's phone vibrated with a sudden jarring intensity. The sharp buzz cleaved the oppressive silence. Bear snatched it from his pocket, his movements swift and economical. His eyes, usually crinkled at the corners, narrowed as he scanned the incoming message. A flicker of something, urgency mixed with grim satisfaction, crossed his face. "Hold on," he muttered, his voice taut with newfound focus. He thumbed a quick reply across the screen. "All right, Leo," he said, looking up, his gaze direct and piercing. "We got something." Leo shot upright on the sofa, his heart leaping into his throat. He stared at Bear, eyes wide, with a hope that momentarily eclipsed his fear. "What? What is it?" he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "White van," Bear stated, his tone devoid of embellishment, just the facts. "Matches your description. Spotted heading towards the old warehouse district, near the docks." A wave of relief, so potent it almost buckled Leo's knees, washed over him. Lily. They had a lead. Real, tangible progress. But the solace was fleeting, quickly overshadowed by a new, colder dread. The warehouse district. He knew the place. A labyrinth of crumbling brick, abandoned factories, and dark, narrow alleys. It was a place where shadows clung even in daylight, a notorious haunt for trouble, a place he and Lily had always been forbidden. His mind conjured images of grimy, broken windows, rusted corrugated iron, and the impenetrable darkness that would now consume the area. A shiver, unrelated to the cool evening air, ran down his spine. The glimmer of hope persisted, but it was a fragile, flickering flame battling against the encroaching fear of the unknown. His small hands balled into fists, knuckles white. The search was no longer abstract. It was about to become terrifyingly real. Reunion in the dark. The roar of engines filled the night, a symphony of raw power that vibrated through Leo's very bones. Bear, his face a mask of fierce determination, swung a leg over his monstrous black Harley, its chrome glinting under the sparse streetlights. "Get in," he commanded, pointing to the sidecar that sat like a menacing metal pod beside the bike. Leo scrambled in, the padded seat surprisingly comfortable, though his heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. The world blurred as Bear kicked the bike into life, the engine a guttural growl that promised speed and purpose. Behind them, a wave of other motorcycles surged forward, their headlights slicing through the darkness, forming a formidable convoy. The air, already chill, became a rushing torrent as they accelerated, the city lights blurring into streaky lines. Leo clutched the sidecar's frame, his knuckles white, but the fear that had gripped him earlier was now laced with a strange, exhilarating hope. He trusted Bear, trusted the sheer force of will emanating from the man, and from the army of leather-clad figures following close behind. They wove through deserted industrial streets, the asphalt uneven, the buildings hulking silhouettes against the bruised sky. The warehouse district was a place of forgotten industry, abandoned factories, and crumbling brick structures casting long skeletal shadows. It was a place where danger lurked, a place where Lily could disappear forever. A cold dread snaked through Leo's stomach, battling the fierce optimism. Then, a flicker of white. Bear slowed, the powerful engine dropping to a rumble. Ahead, bathed in the sudden glare of a dozen headlights, was the white van. It was parked haphazardly near a dilapidated warehouse, its side door ajar. And standing by the open door, a man in a dark hoodie was being held by two of Bear's riders, their grips like iron clamps. One of the bikers, a burly man with a braided beard, had the kidnapper's arm twisted behind his back, forcing him to his knees. The man struggled, grunting, but the bikers held firm. Bear killed his engine, the sudden silence deafening after the thunderous journey. He swung off his bike, his eyes immediately scanning the opening of the van. Leo, without a thought, unbuckled and scrambled out of the sidecar, his legs wobbly but propelled by an urgent need. "Lily!" he screamed, his voice raw. A small, familiar whimper answered from inside the van. Leo launched himself forward, pushing past Bear, who made no move to stop him. He reached the van's opening, his heart a frantic drum. Inside, curled in a terrified ball on the dusty floor, was Lily. Her small face was streaked with tears, her blonde hair disheveled, but her eyes, wide and fearful, locked onto his. "Leo," she sobbed, a sound that tore through him. He didn't hesitate. He clambered into the van, ignoring the grime and the stale smell. Lily unfolded herself from her protective crouch and launched herself into his arms. The impact nearly knocked him over, but he held her tight, his arms wrapped around her small, trembling body. He buried his face in her hair, inhaling the faint, familiar scent of her shampoo, and tears, hot and unstoppable, streamed down his cheeks. "You're safe," he whispered, over and over, his voice thick with emotion. "You're safe, Lily." Lily clung to him, her own sobs shaking her tiny frame. "I was so scared, Leo. So scared." He rocked her gently, murmuring reassurances, stroking her hair. The world outside the van, with its stern bikers and subdued kidnapper, faded into insignificance. All that mattered was the warmth of his sister in his arms, the steady beat of her heart against his. From the mouth of the van, Bear's voice, rough but gentle, cut through their reunion. "She's okay, kid. He didn't hurt her." Leo lifted his head, still holding Lily close. He saw Bear standing there, a massive figure silhouetted against the headlights, his face unreadable. But as Leo looked closer, he saw it. A slight softening around Bear's eyes, a barely perceptible upturn at the corners of his mouth. Behind Bear, the other riders stood in a loose semicircle, their faces grim. But many of them were looking at Leo and Lily, and in their hard eyes, Leo caught glimpses of something unexpected. Relief, and even a faint, tender smile. One of the bikers, the man with the braided beard who still held the kidnapper, met Leo's gaze and offered a nod, a silent acknowledgement of the bravery Leo had shown. The man on the ground, the kidnapper, offered no further resistance, his spirit broken. Leo squeezed Lily one last time, then helped her carefully out of the van. Her legs were still a little unsteady, but she held his hand, her grip tight and trusting. As they emerged into the full glare of the headlights, the circle of bikers parted, creating a path for them. Leo led Lily towards Bear, who knelt down, bringing his imposing height closer to their level. "You're a brave kid, Leo," Bear said, his voice surprisingly soft. He reached out, a large hand resting gently on Lily's shoulder. "And you, little one, you're safe now." Lily looked up at Bear, her fear slowly receding, replaced by a cautious curiosity. She nodded, then leaned into Leo's side. The raw terror of the night began to recede, replaced by the profound comfort of reunion. Leo looked at Bear, then at the assembled riders, a group of men who had been strangers just hours ago, now his unexpected saviors. A wave of gratitude washed over him, so intense it choked him. He knew, with absolute certainty, that he would never forget this night or the extraordinary kindness of these men.